Hello, my name is Father Bart Geger. I'm a research scholar at the Institute for Advanced Jesuit Studies at Boston College. And in conjunction with the Center for Ignatian Spirituality, also at Boston College, we would like to introduce members of the Boston College community to a little-known aspect of St. Ignatius's life, namely the 7,000 letters that we have of his that are preserved today. This means that we have more writings preserved by St. Ignatius Loyola than by any other figure of the 16th century, more than Martin Luther or Erasmus or Thomas More or any of these big names. We have 7,000 letters that he either wrote himself or one of his Jesuit secretaries wrote on his behalf, that he commissioned a letter to them during his term as Superior General of the Society of Jesus. And these letters span from the earliest days of his spiritual conversion until the very end of his life. And these letters are an absolute treasure trove in terms of understanding Ignatius's spirituality and his values. Because those of us who follow the spirituality of St. Ignatius or study his thought, we're all familiar with the Spiritual Exercises, that little book which is his masterpiece, one of the great classics of Christian literature. And probably most of us are familiar with the autobiography of Ignatius, maybe even the Spiritual Diary or the Constitutions. But it's his letters that I would argue by far really illuminate what his spirituality is all about, because it shows how he takes the spiritual principles outlined in the Spiritual Exercises or the Constitutions and how where the rubber meets the road in actual practice, how he lived these values in the ways that he interacted with his fellow Jesuits or with benefactors, with friends. He wrote letters to kings and queens and to countless people who were asking for Jesuits in order to build schools or something like that. And so now, admittedly, a lot of these letters are very kind of mundane. It's like, go tell Father, Sanchez to buy a bottle of milk, that kind of thing. But we have taken about 300 of the most significant letters, and about 20 years ago, some Jesuit scholars translated about 300 of the most significant letters and put them into this volume right here. And so I highly encourage you, if you are an aficionado of the spirituality of St. Ignatius, to make this part of your own reading. And so what we're going to do at Boston College is invite you to participate in a 9-week program, you might say a novena of sorts, in which we select 9 different letters of St. Ignatius. They're not necessarily his longest or his most poetic, but 9 letters of Ignatius which really do a good job of highlighting a particular aspect of his spirituality and his values. One of the reasons why we have so many letters from Ignatius is that when he first created the Jesuits, this was a religious order of Catholic priests that was unlike anything the church had ever seen before. He wanted us, I know this sounds a little hammy, but he wanted us to be a little bit like the Marines of the Catholic Church, to be very highly trained and very mobile, to go wherever the needs of the church are greatest, all right? So what that meant was he recognized early on that if Jesuits are constantly being dispersed all over the world to meet the needs of the church, it's going to be very difficult for them to maintain their enthusiasm for their vocation, the sense of esprit de corps with their fellow Jesuits, because these bonds, these fraternal bonds that they share with each other in community have been dispersed. And because Ignatius realized that, he recognized that, he wanted Jesuits to maintain their enthusiasm for their vocations and to edify each other. He asked Jesuits over and over again to constantly write letters to him, to let him know what's going on in the mission, but then also to write letters to each other, confirming the love that they have for each other, the love that they have for their vocation, and the progress that they were making in their mission. And of course, Ignatius practiced what he preached and was constantly writing letters to, again, his fellow Jesuits, but then also to others who are seeking his help. Sometimes writing letters giving them spiritual advice, sometimes writing letters saying, yes, I will agree to your request, we'll start a new school in this town. And very often having to tell people, I'm really sorry, I can't answer your request because we don't have the men or the resources to do this. And so you see the very human side of St. Ignatius and the very practical side. Ignatius is not a flowery writer by any stretch of the imagination. He is not poetic, and so the letters in that sense can be a little dry. But if you are willing to wade through them and to really wrestle with them, they have profound spiritual value. So just for one example, before he creates the Jesuit order, he has a nun named Sister Teresa Rejadel in Barcelona. She is kind of his spiritual directee, a long distance directee. So he is sending her spiritual advice by means of letters. And those 2 letters that we have preserved that he wrote to her are just filled with this wonderful spiritual advice about the discernment of spirits and how to recognize the voice of God speaking to us, or whenever it might be the bad spirit or our own fears or anxieties coming to the surface. And so it really highlights the wisdom that Ignatius puts out in the spiritual exercises. Okay. And now the reason why we are doing this, why the Institute and the Center are promoting these letters now, is obviously we live in a similar situation, don't we? During the pandemic, the members of the Boston College community have been dispersed. For the most part, we're stuck at home. And there can be a temptation there. It can be a struggle to maintain our sense of enthusiasm for what we do at the university, struggle with that sense of meaning, that purpose, and struggle to find that sense of connection with each other. And so we're hoping that by introducing these letters, again, 500 years later, and we're reading somebody else's mail, but by introducing these letters, showing them to the Boston community, that Boston College community, that in the same way, they can unify us, inspire us, and console us until the time that we can be back together again as a community. And so I will keep you in my prayers, and if you choose to participate in this program, I pray that this deepens your love for our faith, for St. Ignatius, for the Church, and for the mission to which we've been dedicated. Thank you very much.